Tonight, a schoolyard tragedy after a car crashes through a fence, hitting children. Good evening and welcome to ABC News Victoria. I'm Iskhandar Razak. Also tonight, international condemnation of Israel's move to outlaw the main UN aid provider to Gaza. Lockdown lessons, a report that reveals the cost of COVID. And the Trump campaign tries to play down racist jokes at a New York rally. One child is dead and 4 others are in hospital after an horrific crash in a Melbourne schoolyard. The children were seated at a table inside the school grounds at the Auburn South Primary School in Hawthorn East when the car crashed through a fence, hitting them. Natalie Whiting is on the scene tonight. Nat, tell us how this tragedy unfolded.
Well, Isk, it happened at around 2:30 this afternoon here on Burgess Street. Police have told us that the woman who was driving the car had picked up a school-aged child and was performing a U-turn just behind me. As she's turned, somehow has managed to crash through the fence on the opposite side of the road and crashed into a table where as you say, 5 children were seated. So she's crashed through the fence into the school grounds. Unfortunately, an 11-year-old boy has died. He was taken from the scene in a critical condition, but died on the way to hospital, is what we've been told. He was with 4 other children. So alongside him, there were 2 girls who were 11-year-olds, a 10-year-old girl and a 10-year-old boy. Those 4 other children have also all been taken to hospital. 2 of them are tonight at the Royal Children's Hospital in a serious but stable condition, and 2 are at Monash in a stable condition. We're still yet to hear what caused the driver to lose control. Earlier, a education department spokesperson said they thought there may have been a medical incident involved. Police have told us that it's too early to say, but they did say she has been arrested.
The 40-year-old female is in custody. She's been interviewed by detectives as we speak. It's a tragic circumstance. It's really tough for everybody involved, from the community, the school community, the locals, the first responders, AMBOs, police. It's really tough.
Nat, how has the school community reacted to this tragedy?
Well, this is going to have a horrific impact on everyone involved in the school community, Isk. I mean, you heard there that even the impact on the first responders, on police and on ambulance officers, they've also been taking witness statements, speaking with teachers, the principal, students. When I arrived at the scene this afternoon, parents were coming to collect their children. They'd been notified and, you know, I saw parents hugging, consoling children. So obviously, look, this is going to be incredibly difficult. Police have told us that they will be here well into this evening. There are still some officers behind me while they continue their investigation, and the investigation itself could continue on for days and weeks while they try to work out exactly what happened, but a terrible impact on everyone involved. We've had the Premier, Jacinta Allen, put out a statement saying that, you know, this should have been a unremarkable sunny day, and instead, she says, a dark shadow has been cast over the city and the state. She's sent her love and thoughts to the students and the school community. Those sentiments have also been echoed by the Leader of the Opposition, John Pesutto, who said that this is just simply devastating.
Natalie Whiting in Hawthorn East, thank you. Overseas, and Israel's parliament has all but banned the main UN relief agency in Gaza from delivering life-saving aid into the enclave. The chief of the United Nations says the move could have devastating consequences for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians facing starvation.
Generations of Palestinians have called this place home. 16,000 live in the Shafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem. A community built and supported by UNRWA for decades. It was already challenging for their staff, who provide services including healthcare and education, to come and work here every day. Israel's parliament now making it impossible, banning it operating in Israeli territory.
Anyone who acts like a terrorist has no right to exist in the State of Israel. UNRWA is not an aid agency for refugees, it is an aid agency for Hamas.
In January, Australia joined other nations in pausing funding to UNRWA after Israel claimed the agency had employees involved in the October 7 terrorist attacks. 9 staff were fired, but a UN investigation was unable to independently verify the intelligence used by Israel to make the allegations. Australian funding resumed in March, this ban opposed by the government. The Foreign Minister posting on social media, UNRWA does life-saving work. UNRWA is the biggest provider of aid in Gaza, support which has already been reduced to a trickle. The UN's top humanitarian official has warned that the entire population in the north is now at risk of dying. Israel's ban could make it impossible for UNRWA to operate there.
You won't be able to move in Gaza without being subject to possible attack. There'll be no visas for international staff, no work permits. Supply chains will fall apart.
You guarantee more children being killed. And I'm sorry for the lack of diplomacy in my language, but I think we've moved past the idea of sugarcoating this. We will simply see more little girls and boys in Gaza unnecessarily killed.
The legislation approved by the Knesset comes into force in 90 days, a time frame which has been designed to give Israel an opportunity to make new aid arrangements for the Palestinian population. Israel's parliament backing this proposal before that crucial detail had been sorted out.
UNRWA simply must be replaced. They must be replaced with other organisations that are not infected with terrorism.
There's nobody that can replace them right now in the middle of the crisis.
Added pressure from its strongest ally, Washington today reminding Israel of an earlier threat to cut US military aid if conditions in Gaza aren't addressed.
Passage of this legislation could have implications under US law and US policy. That remains the case.
Tough talk that's done little to sway an emboldened Israel.
And Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran is outside UNRWA's headquarters in Jerusalem. Matthew, world leaders have expressed grave concern over this development. Do we have a sense of what impact that's likely to have?
Isk, good evening to you. Let's take, for example, Gaza and getting aid into that area. This legislation makes it illegal for UNRWA staff and Israeli officials to work together. And while the aid agency might want to get aid into that territory, Israel controls all of the entry and exit points into Gaza, including along the Egyptian border. And that means that the permits, the permissions that would be required to get that aid in simply will not be issued. Israel insists that someone else will be able to fill the void here, but it's worth pointing out that UNRWA has been acting in this space for decades. It was set up in 1949. So replacing or substituting that huge amount of infrastructure and that large number of people will be very difficult, if not impossible, in the time frame that Israel has put forward. This decision also raises questions for countries which Israel considers its allies, its partners, its backers. Questions as to how countries such as Australia deal with Israel into the future. It puts it at odds with those other countries. And for all of the strong rhetoric that's come from cities like Washington and Canberra insisting Israel guarantee the flow of aid into Gaza, the Israeli parliament has decided to ignore those demands and do as it wishes. Isk?
Matthew Doran in Jerusalem, thank you. Australia's COVID-19 response eroded public trust so deeply, people might not accept restrictions like lockdowns during any future crisis. That's the finding from an independent inquiry which hailed courageous decisions taken by leaders at the outset of the pandemic, but said cracks started to emerge as the crisis wore on. Political reporter Stephanie Dalzell has the story.
Silent cities, shops shuttered, and hospitals overwhelmed. Generations changed by a once-in-a-century pandemic.
The striking conclusion, I think, from this report, though, is that right now we are arguably worse placed as a country to deal with a pandemic than we were in early 2020.
The report finding Australia's response to the pandemic drove a large decline in public trust.
Many of the measures taken during COVID-19 are unlikely to be accepted by the population again.
Delays in the vaccine rollout, prolonged restrictive public health measures and ultimately cost $31 billion. And the report said some of those measures, like school closures and lockdowns, must be used carefully.
Because of the strength of the public health response, a lot of people felt, they didn't trust what government was doing.
Heavy-handed restrictions also amounted to a lack of compassion, according to the inquiry. That's something acutely felt by Richard Smith, whose wife was in an aged care home. His family was unable to see her for months.
The distress was not only felt by the residents but by the family to see the distress that their loved ones were going through.
But despite all the issues, the report stressed Australia fared well compared to other nations.
We saved lives and we saved livelihoods, and I think Australians should be proud.
One of the recommendations has already been acted on, funding a Centre for Disease Control.
An opportunity to lay a foundation for Australia's future pandemic preparedness.
The toughest decisions on lockdowns, school and border closures and vaccine mandates were made by the states and territories and weren't directly covered by this inquiry. But even so, it was highly critical of poorly justified and disproportionate approaches to restrictions across the country. With goodwill deeply eroded, the report plants serious doubt about whether a less trusting public would even follow better targeted rules in the case of another pandemic. Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
The Prime Minister has tried to rebuff suggestions he sought flight upgrades directly from Qantas CEO Alan Joyce. But having failed to clearly answer questions about his dealings with the airline boss and attacking others, he remains under scrutiny from the opposition. Here's National Affairs Editor Melissa Clark.
More questions, but not much clarity.
Did you call Alan Joyce personally for these upgrades?
Look, the idea Qantas have a number in terms of bookings that are made private bookings.
When he was Transport Minister and later Opposition Leader, Anthony Albanese received flight upgrades for personal travel to Rome, LA and London. A book by a former Nine newspaper reporter says he liaised directly with CEO Alan Joyce about it. But when pressed, the Prime Minister could only recall discussions about other flights.
I recall direct discussions with Alan Joyce over the flights, the Emirates or Qantas flight to Dubai.
And he went on many other tangents. He attacked the author of the book.
I don't see declarations that he's a former Liberal Party staffer.
He pointed to other MPs declaring flight upgrades.
Paul Fletcher's been upgraded at least 69 times.
He compared his declarations to those of the opposition leader.
I don't have a family trust. I don't have any shares.
And compared their travel arrangements.
I didn't have to declare any flights on private jets owned by billionaires like Gina Rinehart because I haven't engaged in it. As simple as that.
Except last year he did accept a private helicopter flight from trucking magnate Lindsay Fox. For all the retorts, exactly how Anthony Albanese secured those upgrades still isn't entirely clear.
He can throw mud, he can blame other people, but this is a problem of his own making.
And the opposition leader is questioning whether any of this influenced the government's decision last year to block Qatar from offering more international flights.
I think the Prime Minister should take the initiative to refer this matter to the Integrity Commission.
A spokesperson for the Prime Minister calls that suggestion a pathetic attempt at creating a headline. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
The Victorian government has been forced to defend the slow rollout of a tobacco licensing program after the state opposition tried to use Parliament to set up a different scheme. And it's far from the only issue Jacinta Allen has. A week after the Premier's big housing push, she's also been forced onto the back foot over Labor's record on child protection, with figures showing dozens of kids have died in care in a 4-year period. Here's state political reporter Richard Willingham.
It's the weekly inferno that rages on. Victoria's tobacco turf wars show no signs of being extinguished.
Someone is going to die because of this war on tobacco.
Tired of waiting for government action,
Thank you, Speaker.
the opposition moved its own bill to set up a tobacco licensing scheme with $1 million fines for those caught selling illegal smokes.
Victoria is the only state in Australia that doesn't have a licence to sell tobacco. And Victoria is the only state that we've seen over 100 fire bombings.
The bill failed.
This kind of petty stunt is not getting us to where we need to go.
That's despite a government commissioned report in 2022 recommending Victoria introduce a licensing scheme.
We're dealing with large organised crime, but we need to design a system from the start, and that is incredibly complicated.
Laws will be introduced next month, with enforcement set to fall to authorised officers.
Victoria Police aren't about running around chasing down every retailer selling individual cigarettes to underage people. Their focus is organised crime.
After a successful week, the Premier was keen to keep the focus on housing, introducing new laws to scrap stamp duty on off-the-plan purchases. But instead, Labor was forced to defend its record, with the dire state of Victoria's child protection services exposed. Department figures show that since 2020, 66 children known to family services have died, including 6 since July. This includes accidents and natural causes. The figures also show there were more than 5,350 reports of abuse of children in care.
Why are more Victorian young kids dying?
This is not a set of statistics. These are kids. These are vulnerable little kids that should not have their lives played with politics, but they should be supported, Speaker. They should be supported.
Order.
The government says it is investing in child protection, but the issue may require more than just money. Richard Willingham, ABC News, Melbourne.
Police are investigating a mysterious act of vandalism that's left a $200,000 damage bill and a trail of carnage. The targets were trees which were killed en masse across Melbourne's southeast over the weekend.
Some were snapped, others hacked apart with saws. Many now shredded, reduced to wood chips. The senseless act leaving locals stumped.
I was shocked because we love the trees here.
That's really devastating. As an exercise physiologist, we take people into the park all the time, and there is so much research around the need for green spaces.
The trees were downed in an act of green carnage over the weekend. Nearly 200 all up, some difficult to replace. 8 parks were targeted, from Caulfield Park to 2 parks in Caulfield South, 1 in Ormond, then 2 each in Carnegie and Murrumbeena. The vandals left a zigzagging trail of destruction.
All been planted within the last 2 years, and they were ripped up, cut off in this deliberate act of vandalism.
Many of the trees were just saplings, but the council says the cost of replacing each one will be about $700. Once you factor in the number of trees and the clean-up bill, the council says it could cost taxpayers close to $200,000.
This has just really set us back.
Police are investigating, many hoping the culprits will reap what they've sown. Jesse Thompson, ABC News.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the private land being held for public infrastructure and the impact on residents.
They live with it over their head every day, just knowing that it's still in place.
It means we can facilitate government agencies doing the things they're meant to do.
Basically, because the government has acquired the building, so they give us the option to either relocate or to close down.
It's been in place for 70 years, so having an expiry on it now is the fair thing to do.
Democrats have stepped up their attacks on Donald Trump after a comedian opening a rally for the former president called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. In a rare move, the Trump campaign has distanced itself from the remarks. With just over a week before Election Day, the fallout underscores the importance of the Latino vote in the crucial swing state of Pennsylvania. North America correspondent Jade McMillan reports from Erie, Pennsylvania.
Just a few months ago, Joe Biden was a candidate in this election. Instead, the president lined up in his home state of Delaware to cast an early ballot for his deputy.
And this is your ballot. You can step right on the floor.
Joe Biden also using the opportunity to weigh in on a scandal on the other side of politics.
Just simply embarrassing. It's beneath any president.
Donald Trump's campaign has tried to distance itself from a comedian's remarks at the former president's recent Madison Square Garden rally.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
A spokeswoman for Mr. Trump said the comment didn't reflect his views about the US territory. while his running mate tried to play the whole thing down.
I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the joke, but I think that we have to stop getting so offended at every little thing in the United States of America.
People living in Puerto Rico aren't allowed to vote in presidential elections. But in the critical state of Pennsylvania, more than 50% of eligible Latino residents are of Puerto Rican descent.
He said a lot of things about Latinos coming from South America through the border. So, you know, it's just, you know, it's people, I guess, are used to, you know, his behaviour.
Kamala Harris's campaign has seized on the opening.
They want a president of the United States who's about uplifting the people and not berating, not calling America a garbage can.
With just over a week until Election Day, both candidates are spending most of their time and money in the 7 states where the race is considered to be competitive. Today it was Georgia and Michigan, but they'll be in Pennsylvania later this week, and it could be the biggest prize. Erie County in the state's northwest has picked the winner at every presidential election since 2008.
And he did nothing for us, so we have to give her the opportunity to show us.
I just don't like his delivery system sometimes. He's very brash, and that's fine. That is who Donald Trump is.
A battleground within a battleground that could prove decisive. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Erie, Pennsylvania.
Thousands of protesters have gathered in the Georgian capital of Tbilisi to demand the annulment of the weekend parliamentary election. They claim the vote was stolen, with the country's pro-Western president accusing Russia of interference. The governing Georgian Dream Party, which has become increasingly authoritarian and tilted toward Moscow, won an outright majority. It says the result was free and fair, but election observers documented violations like ballot stuffing, bribery and voter intimidation. The US and the European Union have called for an independent investigation. Myer is set for a merger in a deal worth almost $1 billion. The department store wants to join forces with a company that owns chain stores Just Jeans, Portman's and JJ's.
Many people know Myer for its perfume counters and its long history in Australia.
Familiar landmark, Myers of Melbourne is one of the big 6 in world retailing.
However, these days, the retailer has been struggling with its profit margins, and younger Australians like Shay and Delora are shopping online instead.
Not a lot of range. I don't think that I'm their target market.
Now Myer is betting its future on a merger.
This is about ensuring that Myer, which is 125 years old, can continue to be a sustainable business.
The deal would see Myer buy up 5 retail chains, including Just Jeans, Dotti and Portman's. All of these are brands that are currently owned by Solomon Lew's Premier Investments.
I'm personally very excited by this transaction and will be joining the board of Myer as well as remaining its chairman of Premier Investments.
The deal is worth almost $1 billion. It still needs sign-off from the consumer watchdog and shareholders.
We're going to vote for the merger. We believe that the merger is transformational.
This retail analyst says the deal is a dud.
Trying to bridge the gap from 13 or 12 up to 80 is problematic. What I would do is I'd rebrand Myer.
Myer's pushing ahead with this merger at the same time that another Australian legacy retailer has collapsed. The owner of Rivers, Noni B and Katie's just entered voluntary administration, which is putting 3,000 jobs at risk.
I think it's dead and buried. I'd be surprised if someone tried to resurrect it.
Tough times for retail prompting major mergers. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
Staying with finance, and the Australian dollar continued to fall today, but the local share market managed its 3rd rise in a row. Here's Alan Kohler.
Financial markets are betting that next week's election will see the return of inflation and a limit on further US rate cuts because both candidates plan to lift the budget deficit with spending and/or tax cuts. So the US dollar is rising, and the Aussie dollar has dropped 5% in a month to 65.6 US cents today. Here's a chart of US government debt as a percentage of GDP since the War of Independence. Apart from World War II, it's the highest it's ever been. And here's what the Congressional Budget Office is predicting will happen based on existing policies. before the election promises increase it some more. The share market rose a third of 1% today, led by banks and miners, and Premier Investments, which is selling 3 of its retail businesses to Myer. Guess which company investors think is doing better out of the deal? Premier is up 10%, Myer down 1.6%. And here's a chart comparing the share prices of Myer and Premier over the past 10 years. Myer has halved, Premier has tripled. Its market value is now more than 6 times that of Myer. And that's because Premier's profit margin is close to 10%, while Myer's is 2.3%. Now, today's deal is complicated, but basically Myer is issuing shares to Premier in return for Just Jeans, Dotty, JJ's and some cash. And Premier Solomon Lew ends up with 26% of Myer and goes on the board to teach them how to make a margin of 10%. They hope. Most global markets went up today, apart from China's. Oil fell a bit more and the iron ore price jumped 2.5%. Oh, and tomorrow is quarterly CPI day, which will decide if and when we get a rate cut. The RBA is looking for 3% headline, 3.5% core. If it's less, happy days. And that's finance.
A spectacular goal from Cairo Cooney Cross has helped the Matildas upset Germany 2-1 in Duisburg. The world number 4 Germany took an early lead in the friendly international. Australia answered with a long-range strike from Cooney Cross in the 39th minute. It was her first goal for the Matildas. Claire Hunt also scored her maiden international goal as the Matildas beat Germany for the first time in 19 years.
I couldn't stop thinking about it after I scored. It just feels a big relief. I think we've all been waiting for this moment for a long time, and it's finally happened, and especially on my 50th game, so it's even more special.
One of the top Irish contenders for this year's Melbourne Cup has been ruled out after veterinary advice. Aidan O'Brien trained Jan Bruegel was withdrawn following compulsory CT scans on Saturday, which revealed the horse is at a heightened risk of injury. The status of Cox Plate winner Via Sistina also remains a key talking point, with trainer Chris Waller still to decide whether she'll start in the Cup.
She seems fine, but you never really know until a few more days, or even in fact until they run. So we're just trying to make sure that we're preserving her to ensure that that wasn't just a one-off run, and she's got a lot more to come.
To the weather. And last night, minimum temperatures were mostly between 0 to 2 degrees below the October average across the state and ranged between 5 and 8 degrees. The lowest recorded temperature was -1 at both Mount Hotham and Omeo. It was a cloudy start to the day, with areas south of the ranges covered in a thick deck of cloud during the morning. As temperatures increased, cloud across the state began to burn off, resulting in a partly cloudy afternoon. North of the ranges, it was a dry and sunny day. The state's high of 28 was recorded at Mildura, Walpurgis and Swan Hill. In Melbourne, it hit 18.6 degrees at 3:32 this afternoon, 21 at Melbourne Airport. Interstate today, it was cloudy in Hobart and sunny in all the other capitals. The satellite image is showing connective cloud reaching from the Pilbara region in WA through to the top end and into southeast Queensland, and a high pressure system in the Great Australian Bight is pushing low-level cloud over Tasmania and the southern half of Victoria. A high pressure system extends a ridge across Victoria and will persist until a cold front approaches from the southwest on Thursday. The next ridge will then extend across the state behind the trough. A cold front will approach the state late on the weekend. There'll be showers and storms in the northern tropics and parts of Queensland and New South Wales. A front will bring showers to Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia. For the capital cities, it'll be sunny in Sydney, Perth and Adelaide, partly cloudy in Hobart, and Brisbane and Darwin will have a shower or two as well. Now back home, it'll be dry, warm to hot and sunny in the north, a high of 31 degrees in Mildura, and temperatures will be slightly above average across the state. Mainly light to southwesterly winds are expected. Elsewhere in the state, in the morning, there will be some patchy morning fog in the south. Areas like Wonthaggi will be partly cloudy with isolated morning showers before clearing to a mild and mostly sunny afternoon across Victoria. On the bays, 10 knot west to southwesterlies will tend southerly and run to 20 knots in the early afternoon. Waves will be about 1 metre. There's a strong wind warning for the central Gippsland coast and the east Gippsland coast as well that have been issued. Now, Wednesday in Melbourne will be partly cloudy with a slight chance of a shower and a top of 21 degrees, down to 11 tonight, but down to 8 before warming up to 23 if you're in Melton. Looking ahead in Melbourne, expect a shower or two on Thursday, cloudy on Friday, Saturday mostly sunny at 26, Sunday a shower too, Monday and Tuesday cloudy and 19. And that's it for this evening's bulletin. 7:30 is up next with Sarah Ferguson.